Welcome to Maker's Perspective. Here, I'm going to be making a cone, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. In this series, I'll be starting with a small starter bubble, which I then gather on and make the cone. The starter bubbles, along with the previous pieces, all start the same. I first push glass off the pipe, roll it into a soft cylinder, and then come off rolling on the mortar. Hold it up and pop a bub. Then at the bench, I inflate and use my jacks, both the blades and the paddle end, to further shape the bubble. Give it a little bit of cool air from the fan, and then dip into the furnace. As I come out from the furnace, you can notice I have one nice homogeneous gather. I go into the block, and I make sure that the whole glass is being touched, from the top of the moil down to the bottom. I go in for my reheat, just to ensure that it's all evenly heated. When I come back, I give it a little hang to watch it stretch and know that it's all nicely hot, and then push it all back on with a block. This allows me to see how the material is moving. Now I have JW blow and go to the marver. Marvering mainly just the bottom at a slight angle. Then coming off the marver, capping the pipe and marvering at a slight back angle, so therefore the bottom is the widest part. Basically making a short, thicker version of the final piece. When marvering, I am just touching the bottom, not pushing. I have most of the weight. So it's back to the glory hole, and I heat. I'll just hang it down, and you'll start to see that it's kind of the shape that I'm going for. Now you can see I had my jacks in the hand, but the piece wasn't exactly hot enough to put the jack line in and flow the way I wanted to, so I went back to heat. I hang it, I'll start my jack line, and most of my jack line somewhere between 3/4 to an inch off the pipe, and squeeze it down. This will also give a reference point for how the piece to flow. JW gave it a little air, and you can see I basically had a gumdrop shape. It's narrower at the top and wider at the bottom. Back at the glory hole, I heat up the whole thing and give it a few swings, using the heat and centrifugal force to further elongate, hanging it and making sure that the jack line is the narrowest part and everything else is wider from there. Putting my blades on that top neck moil area, or the paddle, just to make sure that it's on center. Kind of feathering that heat, going back in and out of the glory hole. Giving it a heat and dropping it out and swinging it further. At the bench, I take my jacks to the shoulder, which is the narrowest area, and the part that I don't want to expand. I pick a plane and then have JW blow into that plane. Another heat and another continuation of the same process. Always remember to have a deep flash. Now I'm starting to heat the back end and getting ready to put the bottom in, which will be the widest part. Back at the bench, I have JW blow, and I slightly push in the bottom with the jack blades, essentially setting up the bottom of the piece. Now putting on the blow hose, I'll be getting ready to refine the bottom. On cones and cylinders, I like a nice rigid edge for the bottom. My jack's following the contour, that slight angle, and JW paddles the bottom. You can see there that he's just over halfway and not just pushing up against my jacks. I want it a little bit more refined, so I'll go back in and heat again. I want to make it extra crispy. So heat and repeat. So jacks on the side and with a little bit of air. Mainly, I'm just capping. Essentially, just holding the pressure that's in the piece already. Then taking my paddle and giving it a little kick. And scratching the bottom with a piece of cane, so I have a good bullseye for the punny. You can notice that the cone is pretty rigid at the bottom, but it's kind of soft at the top. So when I punny, that's where I'll start to address and the rest of the shape will happen. Torching the neck area, and always a deep flash. I got my little circle, and I'll stick the punny to it. Take my tweezers and adjust accordingly, mainly just pushing down. One drop on each side and a bonk. As with the last cone, you can see I've grabbed my paddle. It's really narrow at the lip, so I find it just grabbing the paddle and holding it, the piece up, and then kind of wiggling it on the high side. Or finding the high side, flipping it 180, and then pushing directly from the bottom. So that's what I'm doing right now. Here, once I can turn nice and smooth without my hand moving, or the paddle jiggling, I know it's back on center. So essentially, I use the paddle there because it's too narrow to get my tweezer blades in. So a flash, and now heating that top area. This piece I will finish or trim a little bit differently than the previous pieces in the series. Nice deep flash, a hesitation right on that top. Taking my jacks and gradually making a small flange. Then I have JW come on with a paddle, and I start jacking down that little flange with a slight pull against his paddle. It needs a bit more heat. So a little heat and putting my jacks on the inside, making sure it's cold there so they can't squeeze down too much, and then pulling the piece against his paddle as I jack. Then coming back maybe a ½ inch into the piece and jacking down, going straight into the piece with my jack blades, going back in and cooling that little ridge, grabbing my diamond shears, crimping all the way around it, and a gentle tap of that flange, and it will fall off. So in that move, I trimmed it, but I also roughly pulled out that top area and finished out the main problems I had with that shape. Now it's just refining that lip, going with my jacks to open it a little bit. Jack and paddle, and following the edge of the shape. You can see though, it's still a little bit wavy up there. So before I flash, I grab a larger paddle. With that, I'm going to go on from the bottom and roughly use that as my straight edge for the whole cone. Essentially, that paddle and me turning at the bench will become my mold. I can be fairly forceful with it, and I'm rolling into, and you can see I'm more or less fixed that little top bump. Go back in for a heat, and one more trial with that. Go on lightly with the jacks. And again with a paddle. And you can see the nice angle. I find that method of using the paddle good for cones, but it can also be used for cylinders and other shapes. If making a larger piece, you're basically doing the same thing on a paper marver. Just going to open up that lip, make sure that it's nice. And then checking and seeing if I can feel any bumps with my jacks. It feels pretty good. So now I can torch the bottom and the punty and get a little movement back into that area so it breaks off nice and clean. Good deep last splash. Drop water on the connection point. Bonk, and a torch. And there you have a cone. Now I trimmed it differently than the previous pieces. Anything with a narrow opening or neck, I find it good to trim with that method of using the jacks. If it's a wide thing, it's good to use the shears because, well, you're going to widen it. So there you have my antidote to making a cone. Thanks for watching Maker's Perspective.